In 1965, the American corporate landscape looked fundamentally different. Back then, the average CEO of a major company took home about 20 times what their typical worker earned. It was a comfortable, upper middle class life. Think a nice suburban home and a Cadillac. But these executives weren't exactly global oligarchs flying private jets to see their own private islands. Fast forward to the 2020s and that ratio hasn't just grown, it has exploded. We are now looking at a staggering 350 to 1 average. Since 1978, CEO compensation has surged by over 1,300%. To put that in perspective, that growth has outpaced the S&P 500 stock index and left inflation in the dust. Meanwhile, the average American worker has seen their real wages grow by a measly 18% over that same 40-year period. So how did this gap in CEO to worker pay develop? Are these CEOs actually worth 350 employees, or are there other hidden factors at play that are behind this explosion in pay? To make sense of the skyrocket numbers we've seen, there are two main economic theories that economists are at war about. The first one being the efficient market theory. This perspective views the CEO as a superstar athlete. As companies grew into multi-billion and then trillion-dollar behemoths, the stakes grew with them. If a highly skilled CEO makes a decision that improves a trillion-dollar company's value by just 1%, they've created $10 billion of shareholder wealth. From this view, a $100 million paycheck is actually a bargain. This is just a market price for rare, high-stakes talent in a hyper-competitive global economy. The second theory being the rent-seeking theory. Proponents of this theory argue that the market for CEOs is fundamentally broken. They suggest that CEOs have effectively captured the very boards that are supposed to supervise them, and this is due to the fact that CEOs often hold significant influence over who gets nominated to the board, and often the members on that board are CEOs themselves at other companies. So the pay negotiation for these CEOs goes from being an arm's-length deal between a buyer and a seller to more like a group of friends using shareholder money to reward one another. But these two theories only explain part of what's going on. To fully understand why CEOs make so much money today, we have to go back in time, all the way back to 1951. It all begins with a man named Arch Patton, a consultant at the prestigious McKinsey & Company. Patton was commissioned by General Motors to tackle a delicate problem. How do you determine a rational salary for a titan in your industry? Patton's findings, published in the Harvard Business Review, sent shockwaves through the corporate world. He argued that while the pay of hourly blue-collar workers had doubled since 1939, which was mainly due to war production and unions, executive pay had actually remained stagnant. And when you adjusted for the high tax brackets of the era, Patton claimed these captains of industry were actually 59% worse off than they were before the Great Depression. So this report did more than just ask for a raise. It invented the modern industry of compensation benchmarking. Before Patton, pay was often a secret internal matter. After Patton, boards began looking outward. They started asking, what is the guy at the rival company making? This created what economists call a ratchet effect. Every board wanted to prove their CEO was above average by paying them in the top 25% of the market. But when everyone aims for the top quartile, the median moves up for everyone, every single year, regardless of actual performance. It was a race to the top where no one ever crossed the line, but this was only the beginning. What Patton did only played a small part into the excessive growth of CEO compensation that we see today. So where we must turn next is to one of the most loved and hated presidents of all time. Before the Reagan era, if a company uses profits to buy back its own stocks to artificially pump up the price, it was seen as a deceptive way to move the needle. But in 1982, the SEC passed Rule 10b-18, which created a safe harbor for these transactions. This was a game changer for executive bonuses. Most CEO contracts are tied to earnings per share or EPS. But now, a CEO had a choice. They could do the hard work of innovating, opening new plants, and hiring workers to grow earnings, or they could simply use the company's spare cash to buy back shares. By reducing the number of shares in circulation, the earnings per share numbers goes up automatically. It's a mathematical shortcut to a massive payday that requires zero actual growth or innovation, often at the expense of long-term research and development. So this is how it works. If I had $100 in earnings this year, but I also had $100 in shares outstanding, my earnings per share would be $1. And then let's say we make $100 in earnings again the next year, but we still keep the same amount of shares. Well, my earnings per share would still only be $1. But if I decide to buy 50 of the shares, my earnings per share has now gone from $1 to $2. And that's all from me basically doing nothing besides buying shares back from stockholders. Doing this has essentially doubled my earnings per share in 1 year and would lead to a huge and nice fat bonus for me as a CEO. And so the ability of stock buybacks to boost CEO compensation has reached record highs, now accounting for approximately 1/3 of total CEO pay in large firms. creating a pay from manipulation environment where executives are incentivized to underinvest in productive capabilities in favor of short-term price support. But while the Reagan administration provided the tools for price manipulation, the Clinton administration provided the catalyst for the explosive shift towards stock options. In 1993, as part of a campaign promise to rein in excessive pay, the administration enacted Section 162M of the Internal Revenue Code. This newly drafted section prohibited publicly traded companies from deducting executive compensation in excess of $1 million for its top 5 officers. However, the law included a critical exception. Performance-based compensation remained fully deductible. This resulted in a massive shift in corporate pay structures. By the late 1990s, stock options had become the most dominant form of long-term incentive, as they were viewed as the ultimate performance-based tool. This led to cases such as Oracle CEO Larry Ellison, who eventually accepted a $1 base salary while receiving $77 million in stock options. So this 162M loophole profoundly shaped the executive pay debate and is cited as the primary reason for the skyrocketing level of CEO pay in the 1990s. Median CEO pay at large companies grew from $2.2 million in 1990 to $12.1 million by 2016, an increase of 438%, far outrunning inflation and the 10% growth seen by the bottom 99% of earners over a similar 30-year period. But the cumulative result of all this benchmarking, stock buybacks, and stock-heavy pay led to a phenomenon economists call the Great Decoupling. For 3 decades after World War II, productivity and worker pay rose in a nearly perfect lockstep. If the company did better, the janitor and the CEO both saw their lives improve. But starting in the late 70s, that social contract was torn up. Workers continued to become more productive thanks to computers, automation, and harder work, but their compensation flatlined. And the value created by this increased productivity didn't disappear, it was just funneled upward. It went to shareholders in the form of dividends and buybacks, and it went to the C-suite in the form of massive option grants. The engine of the American economy was still humming along, but the rewards were being rerouted to the ones at the top. So why has CEO pay increased so much? It wasn't just greed and it wasn't just talent. It was a perfect storm of history and policy. Archpad's benchmarking created the upward pressure, Reagan's buyback rules provided the mechanism, and Clinton's tax loopholes provided the fuel. And even though recent legislation like the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act has finally started to limit some of these deductions, the cultural and economic momentum of the last 40 years is incredibly difficult to reverse. The debate today isn't just about whether a CEO is worth 350 times their secretary, it's about whether an economy can remain stable when the link between hard work and fair pay is broken at the very top. So if you guys enjoyed this deep dive, I do ask you guys please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you can be the first one to see my next video. And I want to hear from you in the comment section down below. If you were designing a fair pay system, where and how would you set the limits to CEO compensation? Or would you set any at all? Let me know down there. Anyways, I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.